So this is a Big Book meeting, and we're going to start the Big Book, and we're going to go all the way to, I guess we'll go all the way out to Dr. Bob's Nightmare, maybe AA number 3 too, the second of the personal stories in the back there. How we're going to do it is we're just going to read. I'm going to read and try to narrate a little bit. And we'll go till about, 5 minutes after, and then we'll open up the floor for open discussion. And I don't know, I've been to meetings where they do nothing but read the book, and it's hard for me to stay glued to it most of the time. Just keep my attention on the reading. Anyway, the preface. This is page XI in the 3rd edition, which is the one that I have. I think the 4th edition is the most recent, right? Yeah, the 4th edition. Anyway, this is the 3rd edition of the Big Book, Alcoholics Anonymous. I guess if you have one of those newer books, you can just put 4th in there instead of 3rd. Alcoholics Anonymous. The 1st edition appeared in April 1939, and in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The 2nd edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,000 copies. Because this book has become the basic text for our society, and that's one of my favorite words for the Big Book, is the basic text. It's our textbook. And that's, not many people know that either. Not many people know that the Big Book is the directions for the steps. How many times? I didn't know that for several years. I thought it was the 12 and 12, and the 12 and 12 always confused the hell out of me. So it wasn't until I had a couple of years of sobriety till somebody had actually showed it to me that the steps were in the Big Book. And has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists a sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume, describing the AA recovery program, or the 12 steps, has been left untouched in the course of revisions made for both the 2nd and 3rd editions and the 4th edition. I guess you could put that in there. The section called The Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor. The 2nd edition added the appendices, the 12 traditions, and the directions for getting in touch with AA, but the chief change was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. Bill's story, Dr. Bob's Nightmare, and one other personal history from the 1st edition were retained intact. 3 were edited, and one of these was retitled. New versions of 2 stories were written with new titles. 30 completely new stories were added, and the story section was divided into 3 parts, under the same headings that are used now. In this, the 3rd edition, Part 1, Pioneers of AA, stands unchanged. 9 of the stories, Part 2, They Stopped in Time, and carried over from the 2nd edition. 8 new stories have been added. In part 3, they lost nearly all. 8 stories have been retained. 5 are new. All changes made over the years in the Big Book, AA members' fond name for this volume, have had the same purpose: to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately, and thereby to reach more alcoholics. If you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 44 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me, or more important, yes, I feel like that, or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too. I don't know how similar that is. Maybe I should have read the newer one. Was it different in that book that you guys have? Was it? Yeah. Well, the foreword is probably the same. This is the foreword to the 1st edition, the foreword to the 2nd edition, and I may have to read the foreword to the 4th edition out of this other book over here. Foreword to the 1st edition. This is the foreword as it appeared in the first printing of the 1st edition in 1939. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Now, there's a couple of things there, where he says we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women, and the idea that we have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Just to throw in my 2 cents there, a lot of people, they read into the steps where they say we in there a lot, and I think where it's coming from is from the halfway houses and the detoxes, because I noticed that a lot of these other outside influences like Hazelton, or they tend to shy away from the spiritual aspect and the God thing, you know. So there's a lot of that. They call it a we program thing, you know, and there's a lot of emphasis on getting other people's phone numbers and on keeping in touch with other people, when they don't throw that added part in there and say, so that these people can explain the steps to you and a path that you can get to God, you know, this program of spiritual solutions that we have. And there was a big misconception when I got sober that somehow the we part, everywhere you read in this book where it says we, you know, the first, not we of Alcoholics Anonymous, but and how it works, you know, we admitted we were powerless, and many times throughout the book he says we. And one of the things I've learned over the years was to interpret that we as what was being dictated by the first 100 people to me or to you or to us. Whenever we see we in here, he says we of Alcoholics Anonymous, they're talking about the people who wrote this book. There was like 100 people. There was probably, the way I read it, there was a few of the people with more time, like 5 or 6 or 8 of them, who had helped Bill co-write the Big Book, so to speak. From what I understand, Bill wrote it, and they just edited a little bit and said, change this, change that, you know. But it's largely the same as he wrote it. But anyway, just to get that out there, I think that there is a big emphasis on you know, leaning on other people. And in my opinion, that's not what we should be teaching in AA. And this is one of the areas here where he says we of Alcoholics Anonymous, where he explains what it means when they say we throughout the Big Book and throughout the 12 steps and any of the literature that we read in here is we. It's not so much a we program as it is a you and a God program, and somebody can help you find your way to God program. But they leave that out a lot, you know. They leave the idea that you're going to call other people and somehow that these people are going to help you. They leave the part out where they say work the steps and find God. It's usually just some sort of leaning on another human being thing, you know. But to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person, and besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. Now, the idea that our way of living has its advantages for all is the idea behind those chapters in the back of the book back there. To the wives, to the employer, the family afterward. All 3 of those chapters, you have to ask yourself, what are those chapters written for? Because basically, when we get out there to those chapters, I'm going to show you where he's explaining to those people that we have basically 3 spiritual solutions in AA. Not many people really refer to these very often. And the only thing that I can come up with myself is that you can't teach something that you don't know. Those 3 spiritual solutions are forgiveness, making amends, and faith in God. And when you get out there to those chapters out there, you're going to find that he's essentially explaining to the wife, to the employer, the family afterward, that they are to forgive the alcoholic, that they are to have faith in God. And there, many times out there, the employer is instructed to help the alcoholic find other alcoholics to work with, that the wife is instructed to help the alcoholic find other alcoholics to work with, and that when we get out there, we'll see that it came from where Alcoholics Anonymous came from, which was from the Oxford groups. And you guys know what the Oxford, I don't know, maybe some of you don't, but the Oxford groups was where Alcoholics Anonymous basically came from. And the Oxford groups didn't work on alcoholics, they worked on everybody. It was Bill who kind of Bill and Bob broke away from the Oxford groups and started working on just alcoholics, because they felt that, the idea behind someone who's already been there, someone who understands, and we can relate to one another, was a very big advantage for the alcoholics at that time. Anyway, it is important that we remain anonymous. This is like the only reference to anonymity in the whole Big Book right here. If you'll read some of the other literature, Bill Wilson writes that they didn't fully understand the depth of anonymity at this time. were saying that they remain anonymous because they were overwhelmed with pleas for help. But later on, the reason Alcoholics Anonymous, as it grew, they began to know more and more and understand more and more about anonymity. And as he puts it later on, that the spiritual principle behind our anonymity is self-sacrifice. That the reason that it grew into this, it didn't just automatically, they didn't just start off that way. It was later on that they began to see that the anonymity of not going around telling everybody what you're doing for other people, the benefit of that was humility and faith in God, and to do something for somebody else and not run around telling everybody about it. That's what Alcoholics Anonymous is anonymous. Not because we're a secret society, and you have to ask yourself that simple question. What do you think that the basic idea or the underlying reason for anonymity is? Is it fear that someone's going to find out we're going to remain anonymous because we don't want anybody to know that we're in Alcoholics Anonymous? Or is it faith in God, essentially? Faith, because there's two opposite ends of the spectrum for a recovering alcoholic from this point. Well, actually, as we get further into the book, from the recovery standpoint, is that fear is at the root of our alcoholism, and that faith is the spiritual solution to that fear. And that is one of the most basic ideas of recovery. And having seen that, ask yourself the simple question: do you think that our anonymity is based in fear that someone's going to find out that we're in this secret society and we're like, with this bunch of drunks over here or something? Or, do you think that the anonymity is based in something good, like doing things for others and not taking credit for it? He says that the spiritual principle behind our anonymity is self-sacrifice. And the reason we remain anonymous is because the work that we do is for God. That's why Alcoholics Anonymous is anonymous. And that's in some of the other literature that we have, the Comes of Age and the Language of the Heart. But this is the only place in here that he mentions this anonymity. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on our occupations in such an event. We would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation. Avocation being like a, what's that? Yeah, an advocation. It's more like a hobby. Yeah. When writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship to omit his personal name, designating himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Very earnestly, we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees or dues whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced to work with other alcoholics. We should like to be helpful to such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, or religious societies will be welcome. One of the things he says here, we shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book. If you go back to A Vision for You, like the second to the last page there, 163, 162, there's one of the things he says there is, to me, this is a very important thing. This is the bottom of 162 and the top of 163. He says, thus we grow, and so can you. Though you be but one man with this book in your hand, we believe and hope it contains all you will need to begin. So, where's the sponsor? Where are the AA meetings? Where's all this stuff that you're supposed to have today? He says, though you be but one man with this book in your hand, we believe and hope it contains all you will need to begin. Going back to where we just came from there. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. So when this book was written, it was designed to be your sponsor and guide through the steps. It was intended that you were going to be in some distant city, in Utah or Oklahoma or something, far away from Akron, Ohio, and New York, where it was written, and someone was going to buy this book at a bookstore or order it on, there wasn't no online, but order it through mail or something, and hand it to somebody, and they were going to understand what they read and get sober. That's what this book was intended. It was intended to be your sponsor and your AA meetings, and many of the people who would get this book were intended to start meetings in their own towns and write back to Alcoholics Anonymous and actually start meetings up without any introduction to AA at all. So just to throw that out there, the whole idea that we're dependent upon the way it is today, Okay, this is a foreword to the second edition. This is one of my favorites here. This is one of my favorite places in the whole book, this foreword to the second edition, because in the foreword to the second edition, it essentially is the story of Dr. Bob and Bill meeting, and Bill's on the edge of a drink. Bill has been sober 6 months. He's on the edge of a drink. He's standing outside of a bar thinking, should I go in and have a drink, or should I go make a phone call to find some alcoholic to help with at the Oxford groups over here in Akron, Ohio? And you'll see that in here, that the fact that he's on the edge of a drink and working with another alcoholic saves him is the idea behind Alcoholics Anonymous. So it's like one of the most basic ideas, one of the most important things that we could learn, and we're going to see that here as we read through this, and I'll slow down and point some of it out here. Since the original foreword to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Already, continues the early text, 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered alcoholics. I'm just guessing that many of those groups were just a result of somebody having this book and somebody being motivated enough. As it puts it out there in that the vision for you, it's only a matter of willingness, whether you pick up the book and start your own meeting and start your own little sobriety community there. Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered alcoholics. Groups are to be found in each of the United States and all of the provinces of Canada. AA has flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning, only the augury of a much larger future ahead. The beginning of a much larger future ahead. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck at Akron in June 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience. So he's saying that 6 months, Bill Wilson has been sober for 6 months. The stockbroker was Bill Wilson, the New York stockbroker, and the Akron physician is Dr. Bob. And this is June of 1935. And when we get to Bill's story, we'll see that Bill had that sudden spiritual awakening, and he thought maybe he was losing his mind, and his doctor said, I've heard of these things before, and he gave him a book. What was the book? Or was that Ebby Thatcher gave him the book? Because Ebby was there at the hospital with him, bouncing in and out of his life at that time. He had been sort of drinking and then staying sober and drinking and staying sober, what you might call relapse. And he had been introduced to the Oxford groups and relapsed, and this guy who was 12-stepping him or 6-stepping him, whatever you want to call it, or 4 absolutes is what they actually had. I guess you'd call it the 4 absoluting him instead of 12-stepping him. Sudden spiritual experience. Following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. Now that's Ebby Thatcher. That's Bill Wilson's school, his childhood friend, as he put it. Some guy who was a gutter drunk, absolutely hopeless. You'll see that out in Bill's story. This guy was like, he was a waste case, a lost cause. And I'm sure we all know one of those guys. I've known 2 or 3 of them in my life. outside of AA too, not just in AA. The Oxford groups of that day. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism, who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, and what he could not accept about the Oxford groups was their absolutes. They had the absolute purity, absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. And that's one of the things we claim spiritual progress, not spiritual absolutes, you know. We claim to be growing spiritually towards this idea of what we want to become, instead of one of the reasons I read in one of the other books that they had a lot of failures in the Oxford groups was because they had those absolutes, and if you weren't absolute, then you weren't there, you know, and it was just, oh, the hell with it, give up, you know. But that was one of the tenets that they couldn't go for. Though they could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need for a moral inventory. So there was step 1 up there. He learned of the grave nature of alcoholism. The moral inventory, there's step 4, confession of personal defects. Step 5, restitution to those harmed. That's 8 and 9. Helpfulness to others, step 12. The necessity of belief in and dependence upon God. There's steps 2, 3, 6, 7, and 11. That could be described as those steps. Prior to his journey to Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, but he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. He suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician, Dr. Bob. This physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, and Dr. Bob was a member of the Oxford groups in Akron, Ohio. And he had been a member for 2 years, I believe it said. He had been chronic relapse in and out of the Oxford groups for 2 years. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, and one of the things that I read in some of the other literature, you know, one of these days I'm going to research it and I'll remember what book it was and what page it is the longer I'm sober probably. But Bill Wilson had failed to sober anybody up for 6 months, and he had gone back to Dr. Silkworth and said, you know, nobody's getting sober. And Dr. Silkworth said, yeah, but you're speaking down to everybody. You're telling everybody that they need to have this sudden spiritual experience, this white light that you had in your hospital room that night. And that's just the case is that most of us, 90% of the people, have the gradual educated, what they have like 2 different varieties now. The sudden and profound spiritual experience that Bill experienced was like 10% of the people who get sober have that. And it says roughly 90% of the people who get sober have the gradual educated, a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps type experience that we have. But what he was trying to do was induce this in others. He was trying to get other people to have this sudden spiritual awakening, and he was speaking down to people like, look at you down there, you know, pick yourself up, be like me, one of those things, and he was failing. And that's when Dr. Silkworth had explained to Bill Wilson that he needed to stop speaking down to people, and he needed to stop trying to induce this sudden spiritual awakening and to deliver this sledgehammer of the fatal malady, the idea of the obsession that we have for the first drink, coupled with the allergy that sets up once we have that. Once we take that first drink, we give in to the first drink, and then we take the first drink, we cannot stop drinking. So he called it, we don't have a better word for it. I don't like the word allergy either, and I never did, but allergy is the closest thing that we have to describing what it is that happens to us once we take that first drink. So that's what Dr. Silkworth had explained to Bill. Go out there and try this, give him that sledgehammer of the obsession, followed by what a word I was trying to find there again. Yeah, the allergy. So this is the first guy that he tried this with. And strangely enough, the first guy that he tried this on got sober. Dr. Bob here. Let's see. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. He sobered never to drink again up to the moment of his death in 1950. Now, this is one of my favorite sentences. I like to use this a lot. I like to refer back to this as we work our way through here. It says, this seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. And a lot of the times when I use that little phrase right there, it also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery, is whenever I hear people make reference to, because I say this a lot, when I first got sober, helping others was mentioned in the same breath as pushing in the chairs and emptying the ashtrays and making coffee and cleaning the restrooms and sweeping the floor. And it was like somebody, which one do you want to do? Well, let's see. The hard one is working with other alcoholics. So let's pick one of the easier ones, Let's go with the pushing in the chairs and sweeping the floors and making coffee. And somehow it was put out there that you could do this and still stay sober. And it says here, it also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. If you are going to stay sober and stay sober permanently, this is vital to your future sobriety, that you work with another alcoholic, that you learn how to take people through the steps with this book, and that you see, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that one of the other doctors that Bill Wilson calls one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous was Harry Tiebout, one of the physicians in the back to this book and a lot of the other books that we have. And Harry Tiebout said that basically what's happening to us is that we get an initial ego deflation from alcoholism, and that we get a continued source of ego deflation by bringing others through the 12 steps and bringing them to a God of their understanding. It keeps our ego from restoring its natural place in our lives to try to convince us that we're in charge, that we're running the show, and that we're making the decisions and the calls. And how we keep that ego from restoring itself is by bringing another alcoholic to a power greater than themselves through this book. And this is sort of an acknowledgement, and the way I understand it, it's an acknowledgement to myself, to the people around me, and to God of this world, that I no longer think that I'm in charge of anything if I'm teaching other people that there's a higher power and that they need to find their way to that higher power. It is essentially, as Dr. Silkworth, or not Silkworth, but Harry Tiebout put it, was a continued source of ego deflation. And in my opinion, you can't get ego deflation from submission to God's will. You can't get this from pushing in the chairs, sweeping those things are all great, and nobody should put it down, but don't teach other people that that's a source of continued permanent sobriety, because it will, in my opinion, it will fail you eventually, because this is absolutely vital to permanent recovery. One alcoholic working with another, one-on-one. Hence, the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics. Look what he says, frantically. How many people do you see floating around here going to work on people frantically? Most of them look like they're just hanging out to me. Sometimes I even get the feeling that's what I'm doing here. But I'll explain to you later on how, in my opinion, that one of the easiest ways to get sponsees, and I can do it at any time. I can pick up. If I'm feeling bummed out and I'm feeling down and feeling low, I say, you know what? I go pick up 3 sponsees over to 101 on like Tuesday night or something, and there'll be a room full of kids. And I'll walk in there and say something about God, the steps, spirituality, details. And I'll write down 3 people. Hey, will you sponsor me? Just like that. And I can explain that to other people, too. And, it's just really up to the individual to go out and get these people. But anyway, hence the 2 men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving at the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. He never had another drink. That's Bill Dobson, AA number 3, the second story out there in the personal stories. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. So Bill Wilson was in Akron, Ohio for 3 months and got 4 people sober while he was there for 3 months. That would be Dr. Bob, 3 people. Wait a minute. Dr. Bob, Bill Dobson, and that Devil May Care chap, as it's put in the Vision for You. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually been formed. Though no one realized it at the time, by late 1937 the number of members having substantial sobriety time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. A second small group had promptly taken shape in New York. And besides, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron or New York and were trying to form AA groups in other cities. I think the third one was Cleveland. We'll talk about some of that next week. We're going to open up the floor for open discussion tonight. So there we are at the that last paragraph on the bottom of 17. We'll pick up there next week, and we'll work our way out to as far as we can get. The second, I guess, AA number 3 is the second story out there. All right, so facilitate the reading of the Big Book. Last week we left off on Roman numeral XVII 17 and the foreword. And the format is we're going to read, 2 or 3 pages. I'm going to comment on what I know about AA, and we'll open up the floor for open discussion on either the book or what we're reading or anything you feel like talking about. I'm going to try to gab for about half of the meeting, and we'll open up the floor for the other half of the meeting. And we are down in the middle of that page where it says a second small group had promptly taken shape at New York. And that was Bill Wilson's group. He started at the, I think it was the Knickerbocker Hospital there in New York. And that's where, Bill Wilson called him one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. And his name was Harry Tebout. He was he was the guy who gave Marty Mann, the first woman who ever got sober, the first draft of the Big Book. That was at that New York Knickerbocker Hospital. And he was also, when they started the meeting somewhere else after they left the hospital there, Harry Tebout was the first guy to ever pack a bunch of his drunks into a van and drive them over to the AA meeting. This was back in like 39 or 40. A second small group had promptly taken shape at New York, and besides, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron, New York, and were trying to form AA groups in other cities. The third one, I believe, the third most prominent one was Cleveland. It was now time the struggling groups thought to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership had reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. Now remember that Alcoholics Anonymous wasn't the first choice. They had voted on several different names, and Alcoholics Anonymous and A Way Out were the two most popular, and they voted for A Way Out. And at the last minute, somebody was dispatched to the Library of Congress or something, and they went to see if there was another book entitled A Way Out, and there were like 12 of them at the time. So they were like, we're going to be the 13th book called A Way Out, so let's go with Alcoholics Anonymous. And at the last minute, before the printing went on, they changed the name from A Way Out to Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was an argument that took place about writing of the book. And the argument was, I believe the story is in Comes of Age, the argument was that Alcoholics Anonymous was supposed to be one alcoholic working with another. It's the whole idea behind AA, that one alcoholic working with another is how this thing works. So if you write a book about it, and all you got to do now is read the book, then where's that one alcoholic working the other? And the other side of the argument was, if it was one alcoholic working with another, it's going to take 20, 30 years to get to California. Like a handoff from person to person, it's going to take quite it'll get around the world in the 1970s or 80s or something. But the argument went out to write the book. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. The flying blind period ended, and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. In the fall of 1939, Fulton Orsler, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. This brought a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found to the astonishment of everyone that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. And that Cleveland group was largely responsible for most of those people. It was this next story here about the Jack Alexander story that started the rush primarily to those people in Cleveland there. In the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends, to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got on the world wires. Inquiries poured in again, and many people went to the bookstores to get the book Alcoholics Anonymous. By March 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. Now, that story in the Saturday Evening Post is one of those pamphlets, and when you read it, you know what that story is? Exactly the same story that we're reading in this foreword, that Bill Wilson, he gets sober through the Oxford groups, and it's the same exact story. So it's in the AA, that pamphlet, the Saturday Evening Post, Jack Alexander article. It's here in the foreword. It's in Bill's story, it's in Bob's story, and it's in A Vision for You. Each time it's the same story over and over and over. That when one alcoholic is on the verge of a drink and he's completely defenseless and powerless against that first drink, he reaches out to somebody else and attempts to help somebody else, and it saves the day, and he stays sober. That is Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's why they repeat this story over and over and over again. He didn't make coffee and stay sober. He didn't push in the chairs and stay sober. He gave of his time, gave of himself, and expected nothing in return, and that is the idea behind Alcoholics Anonymous. Numbered 8,000, the mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a national institution. Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this: could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AA had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. And you know, one of the things in that pioneering phase is in AA Comes of Age. There's a lot of stuff in there. And you know, you might think that when you're reading AA Comes of Age, you're reading a history of AA, but there's more to it than that. You're reading the history of why we came to the ideas that we have today, like this anonymity thing that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, many people think that anonymity is based in a secret society that no one knows we're a member of, but it's not, because the whole idea of Alcoholics Anonymous is that faith in God is the path away from the fear that that drives us to that first drink. Essentially, the driving force behind our obsession for the first drink is based in fear, and faith in God is how we combat that. And with that idea of faith versus fear, you have to ask yourself about that idea of anonymity that's floating around, that so many people, it's a misconception. If you will read any of the things on anonymity in Alcoholics Anonymous, the reason Alcoholics Anonymous is because we do things for other people and don't go around telling everybody about it. We don't brag about it because, you see, it cancels out when you do something for somebody else and you don't expect anything in return, no conditions whatsoever. There's a benefit to be had from that. And if you go around bragging about it and telling people about it and showing off, then that cancels out the idea that you did it as a selfless giving act. Now you have tried to receive some kind of notoriety and some kind of payment in the form of, I'm going to brag about it. That's why Alcoholics is anonymous, That's why we're anonymous. Not because we're a secret society, because look at the other point of view. That we're anonymous because we don't want anybody to find out that we're a member of this place. Is that based in fear or faith? Is the idea of anonymity fear-based or faith-based? It's a simple question as that. That is the answer to why Alcoholics Anonymous is anonymous. And many people do go around like we're a secret society, but I think it's a simple answer to that question. You don't have to ask yourself. You can read the literature and why. Although they mention anonymity in the Big Book only one time, and it says our members are too few right now to handle the overwhelming requests that have been thrust upon us. That's why we must remain anonymous. But later, as the years of battling all of this, the growth of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's why that book is entitled "Comes of Age," because it is how we found our way. But anyway. Now, these are the 12 traditions here in this next paragraph. As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, and remember that the whole principles behind the 12 steps is self-sacrifice. That's what Bill Wilson wrote about anonymity. They said, Bill, what's the idea behind anonymity? The spiritual principle behind anonymity was self-sacrifice, and so too are the 12 traditions for the group. The 12 traditions are for the group, how the group is to sacrifice everything that it is for helping the alcoholic. And it can easily be seen. That's why whenever somebody says to me, what's your take on the 12 traditions? It's easy. The 12 traditions are all about sacrifice for the group. The 12 steps are all about sacrifice for the individual, on the idea of this is the path to faith. As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve the principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society. That's like tradition 3, right? That our leaders might serve but not govern, that each group was to be autonomous, and that there was to be no professional class of therapy. There were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization. Even in our service centers, our public relations were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films. So, that's one of the things when Bill Wilson take on anonymity was pages of descriptions and explanations. But Dr. Bob's was one paragraph, and it was brief, precise, and to the point. When they asked Dr. Bob, why is Alcoholics Anonymous anonymous, Dr. Bob said, anonymity is meant to be kept in one place and one place only, at the level of press, radio, and films. Not above the level of press, radio, and films, and not below the level of press, radio, and films, but at and only at the level of press, radio, and films. Nowhere else. That's that simple. And when you see people coming around here going, oh, you broke my anonymity because I was in the hallway and you said my name or something, you can see how easily that's misconstrued. They don't understand fully why we remain anonymous. And you see why we remain anonymous at the level of press, radio, and films is because we're not seeking the notoriety. We're not seeking the fame, the payment, the bragging rights of doing something for somebody else. And in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversies. There's a lot of explanations about how he came to these in some of the other literature over there. This was the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 564 of this book. Though none of these principles had the force of rules or laws, they had become so widely accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held at Cleveland. You see where he's saying there that the first international conference of Alcoholics Anonymous was held in Cleveland, because Cleveland was one of the largest groups. It outpaced New York and Akron combined. It was literally exploded in Cleveland. And there was a reason for that, and that reason was that in the Cleveland groups they were assigning sponsees. In the New York and the Akron groups, they were just sort of, when people hooked up, they hooked up. But as people walked in the door and they were so overwhelmed in Cleveland, the story goes that all you needed was 2 weeks of sobriety and to be ahead of the person that you were sponsoring, because the people were coming in so fast and furious that they would just say, okay, you got 2 weeks, you got on step 2 or 3, you help this guy who's coming in the door. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has. While the internal difficulties of our adolescent period was being ironed out, public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were two principal reasons: the large numbers of recoveries and reunited homes. These made their impressions everywhere. Of alcoholics, now this is I know that this was written in 1939, or it's a foreword to the second edition, right? Yeah, 1955. Figures given in this foreword describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. Okay. So this is 75, almost 80% of the people who walk into AA get sober and stay sober. But there is a little, you see, because today, even when I got sober, I heard 3% of the people in here are going to make it. Look around you, only 3%. And I thought, oh, that's pretty sad, you know. But if you look here, they're talking 80% of the people who come in that door stay sober for the rest of their lives. But there's a little part here you got to pay attention to, and he says really tried. There's a big difference between people who come in here and sit in the back of the room, disruptive, they answer their phone, they come in late, leave early, hit on the women, hit on the men, whatever. They're not really into it, you know, they're just sort of hanging out. And it says really tried here. It doesn't say people who came in and just, you know, hung out. Of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program, but great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed. That could almost be higher than 80%, if you ask me. But there is that stipulation there, really tried. Don't forget that. It's a big difference between people who come in here and really try and people who just come in and sit down and hang out. Sorry. Number 2, another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was the ministration of friends in medicine, religion, and the press, together with innumerable others who became our able and persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have made only the slowest progress. Some of the recommendations of AA's early medical and religious friends will be found further on in this book. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization. Neither does AA take any particular medical point of view, though we cooperate widely with the men of medicine as well as the men of religion. Alcohol being no respecter of persons, we are an accurate cross-section of America and in distant lands. The same democratic evening up process is now going on by personal religious affiliation. We include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. Does that say M-O-S, Muslims? I thought it was M-U-S. Yeah. More than 15% of us are women. At present, our membership is increasing at the rate of about 7% a year. So far, upon the total problem of several million actual and potential alcoholics in the world, we have made only a scratch. In all probability, we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcohol problem and all its ramifications. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly, yet it is our great hope that all these who have as yet found no answer may begin to find one in the pages of this book and will presently join us on the high road to a new freedom. All right, this is the foreword to the third edition. It's a short one. This is one page here. By March 1976, when this edition went to the printer, so I'm guessing this foreword was written in 76, the total worldwide membership of Alcoholics Anonymous was conservatively estimated at more than 1 million, with almost 28,000 groups meeting in over 90 countries. Surveys of groups in the United States and Canada indicate that AA is reaching out not only to more and more people, but to a wider and wider range. Women now make up more than 1/4 of the membership. Among newer members, the proportion is nearly one-third. 7% of the AAs surveyed are less than 30 years of age, among them many in their teens. The basic principles of the AA program, it appears, hold good for individuals with many different lifestyles, just as the program has brought recovery to those of many different nationalities. The 12 steps that summarize the program may be called Los Dos Pasos in one country, Los Dos Etapas in another, but they trace exactly the same path to recovery that was blazed by the earliest members of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, one of my favorite parts of this book is out in More About Alcohol. No, there is a solution. Yeah, More About Alcoholism is step 1. This is there is a solution, and it's a story about how it's just a paragraph about how we all have the exact same program of recovery. If I can find the damn thing. This is on page 17, the first page of There is a Solution at the bottom, that one paragraph there. You know, he was just mentioning that no matter what country you're in, that it's the same basic principles. And this, when you read what Bill Wilson writes, he uses very profound words when he's writing stuff like this. He uses a definite, something that you can't, squeeze out of. And he says here, the tremendous fact for every one of us. Now think about that for a minute. The tremendous fact. That's a pretty, definitive statement there. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. A common solution means it's for every one of us, it's the exact same thing, okay? And I got to tell you, when I got sober, there was like a movement going on in AA. My sobriety date is August 17th, 1990, which is next month will be 20 years. And when I got sober, there was a big movement in AA that the 12 steps had many different aspects. And if you could ask 10 different people how to work the steps and come up with 10 different ways, that there was no set way of working it. And I actually thought that for some time until I came across this book and some of the people who knew this book. He says, we have a way out on which we can absolutely agree upon and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. The tremendous fact is that we have discovered a common solution. It is exactly the same. I hate to say it, but I've run into some women's meetings, not women's meetings, but a meeting run by a woman who was doing the 12 and 12 or the Big Book or something, and for some reason I got the idea that women think that this program is different for them, that it has something to do with emotions and feelings and somehow getting out. One particular woman who was real popular here for many years, I have a lot of her stuff in my 12 and 12 highlight, and I got to tell you, it was so far off base that I have agreed to sponsor women over the years. I've sponsored several women, and I tell them there's a reason why I sponsor women, to try to set the record straight that it's the same program for men as it is for women, that anger and fear and guilt are those 3 most common forms of self that block us from God, and that is the Alcoholics Anonymous program. It has nothing to do with... It has to do with what's blocking me from God and service to others, and the 3 spiritual solutions that we have. When we'll get into those spiritual solutions when we get further on in the book, that they're very precise, there's action involved, and the details are in there. You just have to slow down and pay attention to the words instead of breezing through it so fast, which I did for many years myself. They'd say, somebody'd say, hey, go read this page, and I'd read it and come back and go, I didn't see a damn thing. And then they'd slow me down and say, look what it says. It tells you exactly that you're looking to find what's blocking you from God. It's not about feelings. It's not about emotions. It's about selfishness and selflessness. All right. In spite of the great increase in the size and the span of this fellowship, I'm back in the foreword to the 3rd edition here. At its core, it remains simple and personal. Simple and personal. That's one of the things that's helped me the most in my sobriety, is somebody who could simplify this, because for some reason I got the idea that it was complicated. And I'll tell you where I got it from was those words he uses in step 4 where it says, a searching and fearless moral inventory had me stumped. I had no idea what that meant. scratch my head. I didn't have the humility to raise my hand and say, will somebody tell me what a searching and fearless moral inventory is? And chances are, if I did, some moron would come up with some kind of spiritual calculus, as is put, some kind of complicated explanation of it. When the searching and fearless moral inventory is really a search to find what's blocking me from God, and what's blocking me from God are the most common manifestations of self that block me from a life of self-sacrifice and service to others, which is what we think God wants us to do. That is the fourth step. It's not, I always thought it was some kind of real complicated, but anyway, at its core it remains simple and personal. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. All right, so a couple more minutes, we'll read into the doctor's opinion a little bit, and there's like two doctor's opinions here. One of them's a brief, like half a page deal here, and then he goes on to write another, 4 pages on the, four pages after that. He expands on it. What's that, Chief? Oh, well, I guess I'm going to have to find another book. Forward to the 4th edition. Okay. So we get a page and a half. This 4th edition of Alcoholics Anonymous came off the press in November 2001, at the start of the new millennium. Since the 3rd edition was published in 1976, worldwide membership of AA has just about doubled to an estimated 2 million or more, with nearly 100,800 groups meeting in approximately 150 countries around the world. Literature has played a major role in AA's growth, and a striking phenomenon of the past quarter century has been the explosion of translations of our basic literature into many languages and dialects. In country after country where the AA seed was planted, it has taken root, slowly at first, then growing by leaps and bounds when literature has become available. Currently, Alcoholics Anonymous has been translated into 43 languages. As the message of recovery has reached larger numbers of people, it has also touched the lives of a vastly greater variety of suffering alcoholics. When the phrase, "we are people who normally would not mix," page 17 of this book, was written in 1939, it referred to a fellowship composed largely of men and a few women with quite similar social, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. Like so much of AA's basic text, these words have proved to be far more visionary than the founding members could have ever imagined. So you see where he's saying that there's something very profound was just that one sentence, that we're normally men and women who would not mix. And that's the way a lot of this book is. It's very condensed. It's very, when you read a sentence and you breeze through it so fast that you don't even stop to think about what it means, that's what I did for years before I slowed down and started paying attention. With the help of somebody else, I might add. It wasn't something I did voluntarily. I didn't know there were larger answers in this book than just the simple stuff that I was looking for. The stories added to this edition represent a membership whose characteristics of age, gender, race, and culture have widened and have deepened to encompass virtually everyone the first 100 members could have hoped to reach. While our literature has preserved the integrity of the AA message, sweeping changes in society as a whole are reflected in new customs and practices within the fellowship. Taking advantage of technological advances, for example, AA members with computers can participate in meetings online, sharing with fellow alcoholics across the country and around the world. In any meeting anywhere, AAs share experience, strength, and hope with each other in order to stay sober and to help other alcoholics, modem to modem or face to face. Well, that's old itself, huh? When's the last time you saw a modem? AAs speak the language of the heart, and it's all power and simplicity, and all its power and simplicity. So, although the anonymity deal is press, radio, and films, they're still having online meetings here. I guess as long as you don't show... There's a list of things that break anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films, and one of them is a combination of your face and your name, and your first name and your last name, or any combination thereof. You can show your face and just say your first name or a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, but the list is in one of those pamphlets, and there's as long as you don't have your face and your name together, then you're not breaking your anonymity. We'll open up the meeting for 25 minutes for open discussion, and next week we'll begin the doctor's opinion. There are like two doctor's opinions, I guess. The first one's a little short one, and then they asked him to expand on it to help. And in the doctor's opinion, we have the 5 types of alcoholics that are, out in the chapter to wives is where Bill Wilson actually writes what the 4 types, I believe, out there. There are 4 types of alcoholics in the chapter to wives, and he also addresses in the chapter to wives how to approach each one of these types of alcoholics when you're trying to help them. So all those chapters out there in the back are very important. There's a lot of stuff out there. But the doctor actually has like 5 types. I believe one of his types is the mentally ill person. That's why he has 5 and Bill has 4. But Bill goes more into the detail of what identifies what those types are. The heavy drinker, the moderate drinker, the person who can take a drink and leave it alone. But anyway, we'll do the doctor's opinion. We'll start that next week. And anyone who would like to share on anything we read tonight or anything you'd like to talk about at all is fine with me. Okay. Now we're going to facilitate the reading of Roman numeral page XI through page 164 of Alcoholics Anonymous, the Big Book, sequentially over the course of weeks, allowing several people attending to read a few paragraphs each. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, last week we left off on beginning of the doctor's opinion. And you know what they say about opinions? No, just kidding. This guy here, this is William Duncan Silkworth. He was Bill's, I don't guess you could call him a general practitioner. He was more like a psychotherapist or something. But anyway, he was the head of this town's hospital up there. He was the physician in charge, the head physician. I read in the AA Comes of Age that about, I guess it was right after Dr. Bob died, so it was about 15 years after the Bill Wilson had been to his hospital for the last time as a patient, that he went to this Knickerbocker hospital with another doctor, not Harry Tiebout, but he started, that's where he says he administered to 40,000 alcoholics at this Knickerbocker hospital up until the day he died. 40,000. That tops Dr. Bob's. I read Dr. Bob's 5,000 at that hospital in Akron, whatever. I forget the name of that hospital. But the 40,000, wow. And Bill Wilson called Silkworth one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. So we'd look to Bill and Bob and say, hey, there's our founders. And they go, no, not me. Silkworth was one of our founders. And William James of the Varieties of Religious Experience, and Dr. Young. But anyway, so, one of the things that was beneficial about Dr. Silkworth here was that Bill Wilson was preaching to people. For 6 months, he failed to sober anybody up. And he had failed to sober anybody for 6 months, and he went back to Dr. Silkworth and said, what am I doing wrong? What's going on here? And he said, you're talking down to him. You need to deliver this twin ogre of the obsession of the first drink. And once you take the first drink, you get this allergy that sets up that compels you to keep going till you die. And that's what the very first person that he tried that on was when he went to Akron. From the way I understand it, the first person that he tried that on was Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob sobered up, never drank again, and that was the birth date of Alcoholics Anonymous. But it was due to Dr. Silkworth telling him, stop speaking down to people. You're telling them they got to have this white light thing, and they're not listening to you because you sound like some religious nut, some religious zealot who's telling them to, pick themselves up and look at you down there. You're down there, I'm up here. That's where we got that try not to speak down to people from a spiritual hilltop thing was from his first 6 months of failed attempts to sober anybody up, as it's put. The doctor's opinion, XX, that's 13, Roman numeral 13, I think. I don't know. These books are all different pages lately. Oh, is it? So it's 15? Oh, just to go to the first page of the doctor's opinion. We of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader... Now remember that we, again, how many times have I been in AA where I hear people refer to we as we the family, and it's coming out of those rehabs, where it's like sort of a human dependence on other human beings to where, together we can do this as a family. Whenever I hear somebody go, good evening, family, I go, family? What? I don't know where they get that from, but the thing being, the reason I point that out was because there was somewhat of a movement going on, in my opinion, the way that I experienced it. I sometimes felt like I was left out. I had a few people that I hung out with, but I never had this clique of like 8 or 10 guys who always stayed together in this group, and we were like some kind of family, and it was. I have a family, yeah, but my family was sort of, even when we were in the same room, we were distant, But that whole idea of, and I later learned that it was a reason why I didn't much care for that whole 8, 10, 12 people in a big clique of like a family, was that's not what AA is. It's not about that. It's about you and God. And whenever you see we, this has nothing, and the reason we point that out, the reason I point that out, is because some people think that if you get close to these people, they're going to help keep you sober. But if none of them knows the 12 steps and knows how to get you close to God, then they ain't going to do a damn thing for you. I always say, hey, they're probably, you think you're going to call me and tell me your problems, I might join you in a drink. Hell, don't call God and tell him your problems. I'm just another drunken bum. That's who I am. So we of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book. Remember, he says that Alcoholics Anonymous is born of medicine, psychiatry, and religion. No particular one it favors, but it's born of all three, is the way he puts it. Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health. A well-known doctor, chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital, that's at Towns Hospital, yeah, specializing in alcoholic and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. So I don't guess you'd say he was a general practitioner. They were specializing. Probably one of the first hospitals to do that, the way I understand it. To whom it may concern, and this is like the short version. They give them an extended version here after this first page here. To whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, talking about Bill Wilson, obviously, was an alcoholic of the type I had come to regard as hopeless. And you know that he gives us these types over here in this other section. There are, 5 of them, right? Yeah, 5 types over on page 20, 28, 29, 30, I guess would be your books, page 30. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. And we all know where he got that from. He got that from Ebby Thatcher. Ebby Thatcher had first come to him in his house, and we'll see that in Bill's story. Ebby Thatcher first came to him at his house, and he didn't really sober up right away. He got drunk, and then Ebby came to visit him in the hospital and gave him he said, what's this treatment that you got again? He asked him, and he gave it to him again at the hospital, and it was in the hospital that he had worked his steps there. So he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. And, that's one of the most important things that I teach when I go to AA. I've narrowed it down over the last, 20 years I've been sober to that. If I ever ask myself, what am I doing at an AA meeting, that's the primary message that I carry. That there's so many people think that you can come in and hang out and push in chairs and make coffee, and there's other forms of service, and those forms of service are good. But the number one, the only thing that will help us build a defense against that next drink is working with another alcoholic. It cannot be done without. This is one thing. You can do without making coffee and stay sober. You can do without pushing in chairs, giving people rides to meetings, but you can't do without helping others. And for some reason, it seems that maybe it's just my imagination, but I think that some people, maybe it's the hard work involved. It's like, who wants to do all that hard work? Who wants to go around telling? And if you're not doing it, how can you tell other people to do it? That's therefore you don't really hear that much of it around here. To present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis. So that's the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. When we get out to those chapters, to the employers, to the wives, and to the family afterward. I always, whenever I'm reading those chapters or commenting on those chapters, I say that from the Oxford groups came the idea that the 12 steps are for everyone, that everyone can learn to forgive when they're angry, to get rid of their anger, and everyone can learn to make amends when they've harmed others, that these spiritual solutions that we have are for everyone. In those 3 chapters, I've got it circled and highlighted in those chapters where he actually tells the wives to forgive the husbands and to help them find other alcoholics to work with and to make amends if they've harmed their husband. Those directions are given across the board to everyone, and you can see where he says these men and their families. This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered. I personally know of scores of cases who were of the type of whom other methods had failed completely. These facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in this group. They may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of such situations. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. Very truly yours, William Duncan Silkworth, medical doctor. The physician who at our request gave us this letter had been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or we were outright mental defectives. These things were true to some extent, in fact to a considerable extent with some of us, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may, of course, mean little. But as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. Though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as the altruistic plane, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. Now, that favoring hospitalization, that to me, I work with a lot of people who, hospitalization for me came in the form of the county jail. It just, all it meant was a period away from that first drink, Enough time, like he says, the alcoholic who is jittery or befogged, and it clears up your mind enough, just enough that you can understand, to understand what it is, that the simple ideas. It's real simple, but my attention span was virtually non-existent when I was drinking. But I don't know. Lately, I've been focusing on the need for hospitalization for people who are really out there. I mean, if you haven't experienced it, you will. I mean, a lot of I hate to say it, but a lot of opiate addicts that I work with are really hard to get them away from that stuff, man. It's just, I always say, how you can tell if they're on it, they're happy, and if they're angry, they're off of it. So I don't know why, but that seems to be the case for most of them. More often than not, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, as he has then a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. The doctor writes, now this is the second doctor's opinion, the subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. I say this after many years' experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcoholic and drug addiction. Hey, wait a minute. Did he just say drug addiction? We're not allowed that in here. You need to hit the door there, buddy. There was, therefore, a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages. Now, how long did I open this book and stay sober before I actually learned that it was in masterly detail, a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages? I tell you, I came in here and I heard people say things like, yes, 10 different people how to work the steps. You get 10 different ways to work the steps. There's no real set way of working the steps. I've even been to NA meetings and asked them, guys with time, 20 years, and said, can you explain to me in brief, an expurgated version what their fourth step was? And I have 3 or 4 people who could not answer that question for me. And I said, look, I wasn't asking you to give me a 5-hour spiel about it. We explained to me your 4th step, you know. But I haven't had any of them actually explain it to me like I've gotten it from this book, and the masterly detail. And using the words of this book are, for me, the most important thing, like the most common manifestations of self that block us from God's will. Like in the 4th step, he says, we hope you now see what, we hope you know now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from him. That's the most simple idea right there. And how many years did I breeze right over that before I actually saw it, you know? And when he says the masterly detail, it took me actually to find somebody who knew what that detail was and to slow me down and explain it to me before I actually saw that. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. You know, that synthetic knowledge, there's a spot in More About Alcoholism. No, there is a solution. There's a spot and there is a solution where he says, we had already walked far over the bridge of reason towards the desired shore of faith. But for some reason, we could not quite step ashore. We couldn't. We had we not been leaning too heavily on reason. And to me, that was a really important thing for me because, you see, I believed in God since I was like a teenager, all right? But it was that part where I had this complete reliance and dependence upon God that I was having that trouble with. I somehow thought that I could make a conscious contact with God with intellect and scientific knowledge and the brain and the awareness of the world or something. I didn't understand, and the point I'm getting at here is I didn't understand that my relationship with God is based on what I do every day, that the actions that I take every day is my faith in God. It doesn't take place in my head. I don't sit somewhere in quiet and go, home, God come to me, home, because it ain't coming. The way God comes to me is what I do with my life. And one day I ran across a guy who said, you know, how close I feel to God is in direct proportion to what I do for God. And that, to me, is what he's talking about here. The powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. Somewhat of a reference to that the bridge of reason does not lead to the land of faith. You must take the leap and do the action required. You must sacrifice your life and your time to help others in order to receive the closeness to God that I feel, that I believe that's what they're trying to explain to us. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book came under our care, obviously Bill Wilson again, in this hospital, and while here he acquired some ideas which he put into practical application at once. Later he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgiving we consented. I think Bill Wilson put it as he put his own career in jeopardy. Actually put his own career in jeopardy to let Bill come and work on these alcoholics. And fortunately for him, it worked out. The cases we have followed through have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. The unselfishness of these men as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive, and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has labored long and wearily in this alcoholic field. They believe in themselves and still more in the power which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics, and this is that double sledgehammer of his, the obsession followed by the allergy, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. I guess that's like crying and screaming and begging. And the message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. That's one of my favorite passages right there. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. And for me, that is Alcoholics Anonymous program of recovery. The idea that, in the 11th step, he says, when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives, our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane. And that's like the whole idea behind the inventory, the 3 spiritual solutions, and the idea of how close I feel to God is in direct proportion to how much I do step 12. If I'm not doing step 12, then obviously that's how close I'm not feeling to God. But the depth and weight, to me, it was so simple that it was clear to understand, yet there also came that idea that if you don't do it, you won't get it. This is not something that takes place in your head. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. If any feel that as psychiatrists directing a hospital for alcoholics we appear somewhat sentimental, let them stand with us a while in the firing line, see the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children. Let the solving of these problems become a part of their daily work and even of their sleeping moments. And the most cynical will not wonder what we have accepted and encouraged, that we have accepted and encouraged this movement. We feel after many years of experience that we have found nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men than the altruistic movement now growing up among them. It's the second time we've seen that altruistic thing there. So up here he says psychiatrist, so obviously then Silkworth was a psychiatrist. If any feel that as a psychiatrist directing in a hospital for alcoholics we appear somewhat sentimental. So that I haven't really noticed that before, but obviously he was a psychiatrist. I did see that there's a letter between Dr. Carl Jung and Silkworth in this other book. It's like a 3 or 4 page letter between Silkworth and Jung. Dr. Carl Jung, the Swedish, wasn't it? Swedish psychiatrist, one of the founders of modern psychiatry. And I think there's even a reference to him, and it says a certain American businessman went overseas, and that's a reference to this guy who, you guys remember that there were 2 guys who got Ebby Thatcher out of the clink, so to speak, went before a judge and got him so that they didn't commit him to a mental hospital. They got Ebby Thatcher released to them, and one of those 2 guys was that guy who went to Carl Jung was, what the hell is Roland Hazard. Roland Hazard was one of the 2 guys. Certain American businessman there. Okay, men and women. My first sponsor used to repeat this all the time in meetings. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. In other words, it feels good to drink. And my first sponsor used to always say, okay, so what was so wrong with the way that you were feeling that you had to have alcohol to feel better? We're going to get to that inner self and make that inner self feel better about who it is. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. Differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense and ease of comfort which comes at once by taking of a few drinks. Drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, and so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. That kind of reminds me of that thing that's floating around AA about how many times do I hear that? I hear it so many times it makes me... I have to use the forgiveness thing on it all the time. that whole thing about what's the definition of insanity? He's doing the same thing over and somebody throw a rock and hit that guy in the head. See, the reason why we talk about insanity in Alcoholics Anonymous is not because of craziness. It's because of alcoholic insanity. Alcoholic insanity, and I hear people come in here and they make a reference to, my life's getting insane again. Are you drinking? No? Well, then your life ain't insane, because we're only talking about alcoholic insanity. You see, these 12 steps don't work for schizophrenia. They don't work for bipolar. They don't work for any of that manic depressive. All they work for is alcoholism. But anyway, on the other hand, as strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems and despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. The only effort necessary being that required The only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules. Men have cried out to me in sincere and despairing appeal, Doctor, I cannot go on like this. I have everything to live for. I must stop, but I cannot. You must help me. Faced with this problem, if a doctor is honest with himself, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Although he gives all that is in him, it is often not enough. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. And to me, I have to tell you, that's one of the things. When I have a sponsee who's in relapse, and they come to me thinking I have the answers for them. They go, "What do I do? You got time? What do I do?" And I say, I want to come down and I want to say, I know what to do. I got all this time. I've been through the book to do this, and the only answer I have, the only answer that I come up with is a humble answer, and I say, ask God for help. On your knees, you humbly, with all of your sincerity and your heart, you ask God for help, because that's what happened to me. That's the only thing I can come up with. Though the aggregate of recoveries resulting from psychiatric effort is considerable, we physicians must admit we have made little impression upon the problem as a whole. Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach. I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. I have had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal which was to be settled on a certain date favorably to them. They took a drink the day or so prior to the date, and then the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount to all other interest, so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not drinking to escape. They were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. There are many situations which arise out of the phenomenon of craving which cause men to make the supreme sacrifice rather than continue to fight. Now, this is where he's going to give us these 5 classifications, he calls it. He doesn't say the 5 types, he says the classifications. The classification of alcoholics seems most difficult, and there is much detail, and much detail is outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We are all familiar with this type. They are always going on the water wagon. They are over-remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. There is the type of man who is unwilling to admit, though he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. There is the type who always believes, after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. There is the manic depressive type, who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. And there are the types entirely normal in every respect except the effect alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, friendly people. Out in the chapter to wives, see, this is the Dr. Silkworth's description of the 5 types of alcoholics. But Bill Wilson goes into real detail out in the chapter to wives. And not only does he go into detail about the types of alcoholics out there, but he goes into detail about how to approach each one of those different types. He'll say, this is type number 1, type number 2, and then he'll say it right after he gives you all the types. He says, this is how to approach the alcoholic who is in the throes of type number 1. This is how to approach type number 2. And he sort of builds on each one. Sometimes he'll say you use the approach of both number 1 and 2, and here's a little extra you throw into how to work with this person who's at the third stage of this out. And being the last stage would be the gutter guy who's literally drinking scope or something and sleeping in behind dumpsters and eating out of dumpsters and stuff would be like the last one of those. But anyway, the best one is out there in the chapter to wives. I say that because sometimes I get the chapter of wives and I go, the chapter to wives. Well, I'm not a wife. Why are we reading this? But there's so much out there, All these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people. I've always hated that word, allergy, but it took me a few years to get used to it. The obsession I understood, but the allergy thing, I said, that's not an allergy. I know what an allergy is. You sneeze and your eyes get watery and, you itch and scratch. But the thing is, you see, being the English language, we don't, being confined to the English language, we don't have a better word to describe it. So if you're searching for any of the words that we have, allergy is like the closest word we have to that. So it took me a while to get used to that. It also took me a while to get used to saying the word God. I used to always, power greater than ourselves, higher power, and I haven't said that in years other than reading it now. It took me a while to get used to the God thing. Same thing with that allergy. I'm okay with the allergy thing now. May be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. Entire abstinence.